What if you lost your mother, your father, and your country all in the same year? Stop and think about that for a moment. What if you read about it? It would be a compelling book, wouldn't it? Well, it is a book, and it's called Goodbye America. And I'd like you to meet the author, Rita Malie. Rita, so good to have you here. I've got to ask you right off the bat, this book was rather personal for you, wasn't it? Very personal, as a matter of fact.
Very personal, yes. It's my mother's story. The story takes place between the years 1919, it's her childhood story, 1919 and 1924. And with that span of 5 years, there were 3 historic events that changed her life. The flu pandemic of 1918, World War I, and immigration. My mother was born in Ohio, and at 4 years old, her father dies from the flu. Leaves her mother, a widow, with 4 little children. Now, my grandmother hadn't been in the country very long, didn't know the language very well, had no support system. Now she has no source of income, no job. So the only thing that she felt was her recourse was to sell everything and go back home and be with her family, which is very natural to feel that way. So that's what she does. But it's the end of World War I. Europe is devastated. When she gets there, with her 4 children that she calls her little orphans, she finds poverty, starvation, and political reconstitution. Because now her country isn't even what she left previously. Now it's called Czechoslovakia. Needless to say, she realized she hadn't made a good decision in leaving America. Doesn't have enough money to take everybody back with her, all 4 children. So she decides to take the 2 older children and herself, they're not American citizens, and leaves my mother and her little sister behind for more than 5 years, with relatives, but strange relatives. Strange country, strange language. So the story ends after she's finally sent for to come back to America. Her voyage across the ocean, lands in Ellis Island, and is processed as an immigrant. Now, she's not an immigrant, she's an American citizen, processed as an immigrant. And today, my book is displayed and sold in the Ellis Island Immigration Museum.
Goodbye America. What an honor that must be. When it comes to the book, what are you hoping that readers will gain, will learn from reading the book?
They'll learn how precious family stories are. And every family has important stories that should be told to preserve their heritage. Otherwise, it'll be forgotten. Fortunately, my mother had been telling her story to 3 generations in our family. First to me and my siblings, then to my children, and then to my grandchildren. And she's telling the story to my grandchildren, her great-grandchildren, every time we visited her at Thanksgiving. So writing, and the reason she was telling these stories all of these generations, because there were lessons and messages that she didn't want us to forget.
I was going to ask
and
you about
wanted to
that.
learn. Family love, family loyalty, the strength of the human spirit, that regardless of what's thrown in your path, whatever difficult and sad events, you can overcome them. But the most important message, and the reason she and I decided to call it Goodbye America, she never wanted us to take for granted the blessings of living in a free country, living in America. It has been said there's nothing new but that which has been forgotten. So I didn't want my mother's story to be forgotten. It was a labor of love for me and the legacy to my family. And there are other benefits to telling family stories. Most people don't know this. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal. Emory University has done a study on family stories, and they have found a direct link to children's self-esteem and resiliency based on the family stories that they're told. But it's not the happily ever after stories that make the difference, but the sad ones where they've learned their relatives had to overcome sad events and were stronger for it. Those were the ones that made the difference. So one of the things I do when I speak at middle schools and high schools, the last thing I pass out is a list of questions for the students to take home and interview their parents and their relatives to find out what their family stories are.
Oh, that's a great idea. I hope the families, genuinely hope the families take advantage of that. And that study by Emory sounds fascinating.
It is.
And it really almost stands to reason, because we all have a yearning to know about our heritage and where we all come from, and the struggles that take place in our families. And you've certainly, as you said, kept your family struggles, you put them right out on center stage for all to learn from.
Well, I kept my mother alive through these years that this book has been released and talking to other people. But I've also heard doing book signings from other people telling me their family stories, but unfortunately they didn't write it down and the people are gone. So yes, I'm really glad that we were able to preserve her story.
What a joy to talk with you. So thank you for taking your time to hear about Goodbye America. And before you leave, I wonder if you would be so kind as to read a passage from Goodbye America for us.
I'd love to. As I mentioned, she's telling the story to her great-grandchildren. And so the story takes place in the present, and then she goes back in time. And I'm going to read to you from the epilogue. So she's in the present, talking to Morgan and Madison. "I have a question, Bubba," said Morgan. "Why did people think the streets in America were lined with gold? I never saw gold on any streets." And my mother answers, "Years ago, when Americans returned to their homelands across the sea, many times they had money to buy land or houses. They were considered to be successful and lucky in America. They also were more experienced and told unbelievable stories from the big world. This was fascinating to their neighbors, who knew nothing about the village, but the village they lived and died, where they lived and died. The men coming back from America usually didn't talk about the hard days and hard work they experienced in America. They only described life in America as a success story. The picture they painted to their friends and family in Czechoslovakia was only about the good times. Does that help you understand? Yes. Just remember, girls, immigrants still come to America today from all parts of the world, and for the same reason. They come to our country to seek a better life for themselves and their children." Madison then grabbed Bubba's hand and Walker and said, "I think it's time we better go downstairs. It's time to join the family for another happy Thanksgiving."